Life Elsewhere is about art, media, and culture. Is about art. Life Elsewhere is about art,
Life
media,
Elsewhere
and
is about
culture.
art, media, and culture.
Stand by. Quiet in the studio, please. Cue Norman B. Roll intro. Cue theme music. 3, 2, 1.
This is Life Elsewhere, created and hosted by Norman B.
Hello there and welcome to another edition of Life Elsewhere. I'm Norman B. A big show for you today. I don't want you to miss 1 second. Coming up, we're going to talk to a gentleman that took some amazing photographs in 1979 of one of my all-time favorite bands, Killing Joke. Frank Jenkinson was there, documented what was happening, and we're going to talk to him about that very special period. Plus, we're going to play highlights from my 2013 interview with Martin Glover, aka Youth, the bass player of Killing Joke. Don't go away. This is Life Elsewhere. This piece of music, I've got to tell you, is probably in the scheme of things for me, probably one of the most important pieces of music next to the first time I ever heard Elvis that really changed my thinking. The very first time I heard this, I just stopped. I could not believe it. It really turned things around for me. It's Killing Joke, Turn to Red. And that version you're hearing right now comes from my original 10-inch version. The package and everything I've still got. And I have to tell you, that is an absolute collector's piece. Killing Joke, Turn to Red, Turn My Head Around. Now, at that time, when that piece of music came out, nobody really knew very much about the band Killing Joke. I made it my purpose to find out as much as I could, got to know the management, and went to London and hung out with some of the members of the band and their manager at the time in a shambles of a place in Notting Hill in London. What I didn't know at the time was that there was a gentleman documenting some of the things that were going on. This is a big setup to let you know that has just come to my attention an incredible book, and this is sort of the beginnings of a bigger incredible book, all about Killing Joke in 1979. Frank Jenkinson is with me, talking to us via the magic of Skype in London. Frank, welcome to Life Elsewhere. Thank you for joining us.
No, thank you for having me.
So here's my long preamble there. This piece of music, Turn to Red, just turned my head around. I thought it was the most amazing piece of music I'd heard for such a long time. And as I said, I likened it to the first time I heard Elvis. It was that important. I still think it's amazing. The band at the time was shrouded in mystery, and all kinds of myths and stuff went on about Killing Joke. But you were there taking photographs, and you have a book that documents just a couple of months from 1979. Frank, tell me about that time, because it's just it's still unique. It's something which I think everybody that's interested in music just needs a little more information about. Tell me about the band at that time.
Okay, well, the band was really based around the house you mentioned in Notting Hill. So a chap called Brian Taylor was the manager of the band, and the band evolved by people who came to that house. Initially, Jazz came to the house with a guy called Carlos, who was a friend of mine, and Paul, Big Paul, his girlfriend at the time, Christine, was living upstairs. So I guess the two of them met to begin with, and from that, I think you turned up by various acquaintances, and I think Geordie was found through the New Musical Express. So eventually these four guys ended up as a unit in the house. And suddenly the music kind of exploded. I was a sort of a jazz fan before that. I was into Weather Report. That was my band type of thing. I wasn't paying much attention other than a little bit of prog rock here and there. But suddenly you had this band that kind of were making a fantastic noise.
Yes.
Anyway, I had the camera, and I was there. I wasn't part of the management as such. I wasn't one of the directors. There was a number of directors of Malicious Damage, including, as I said, Brian Taylor, Dick Lavan, Adam Morrison, Mike Coles, and Nolly Tappy, Phelan, can't remember his first name suddenly.
Danny.
They were the managers of the band.
Yeah.
So I was there with my camera, going along to the gigs, making myself kind of invisible in a way. The band were very kind of loath to have their photographs taken. They were very, very paranoid about most things, and especially about the press. They gave the press a really hard time, and likewise the press gave them a hard time, which hasn't done them sort of a lot of good in the long run. You've had various stories about how they manage interviews and stuff.
Yes, yes.
But all individuals, I mean, going for a pint with Jazz now and then, he never had any money either. Nobody had any money at that time, really. It's all very lost in the mist of a long time ago.
What I think is fascinating, and why we have you on the program, is we're going back in time to 1979, but you documented it. You didn't document what was happening at the time because you thought, oh, 40 years later, somebody's going to be interested. But what I find fascinating about the pictures that you took, and in this book that you have, which I think is a preamble for a much bigger book, is that here are these people in this band that were making completely different music to what was going on at the time. But they, as we already said, shrouded themselves, whether it was deliberate or not, in this kind of sort of mystique, this sort of mystery. And the photographs that you took really capture that. And I want to just talk to you a little bit, Frank, about the fact that you took these photographs, and when you were taking them, did you have any thoughts about the future, about how these pictures would be looked at in the future?
Absolutely not. No. It was a thing in itself at the time. I thought the only ambition I had then was to get something published. There was a couple of published. There was a TV television show was a published thing. Other than that, they've been sitting under my stairs since the 1980s. The house kind of fell apart in 1980, 81, and everybody went their different ways. And I think different management took over the Killing Jokes. So we lost contact with each other for a number of years after that. And really only since Facebook and stuff like that, discovering that I knew the bands were still there. And I remember their 30th anniversary, I think I went to actually go and see them. I hadn't seen them for a long time.
Yeah.
And I was blown away by, the fan base they still had, and the loyalty of that fan base, and the effect they had on quite a large segment of the population. There had been various stories before that about influences on Nirvana in particular and stuff like that. And I became a fan of The Orb accidentally. I didn't know who he was, actually, for quite a long time, until I discovered he used to be the roadie for Killing Joke. That was Alex Patterson.
Right, yes.
But anyway, I had no idea that these photographs were going to be anything other than just photographs, and they weren't that good, I thought, really, some of them. Some of them were captured a certain atmosphere, but on the whole, there's hundreds of them have required a bit of cleaning up to make them look presentable, really. Anyway, I had no idea that become more interesting in a different sort of way, so you're looking at yourself through different type of eyes from the future backwards.
Yes. Now, let's talk about just taking the pictures themselves. You say in just the preamble in the book that you pushed the film, because this is way before digital, of course. You pushed the film. Talk to me about just taking the pictures. You've got.
I used to go out and I'd buy a 20-meter roll of film.
Yeah.
And I'd be under the bedclothes rolling it up into rows. I used to get maybe 50. I mean, a standard roll of film was 24 or 36 shots at the time. I'd maybe get 50 or 60 shots on a roll of film. And I'd dabble with the, what's now the ISO, it used to be the ASA then, and I'd push it from, say, a 200 film to 400 or 400 ASA film to 800. And that would allow me to operate without a flash. It did detract from the quality, obviously.
Right.
They weren't as crisp and shiny as you might take in bright daylight, but they worked in a concert atmosphere where you get flashes of light, you get various degrees, so you might be lucky sometimes, or sometimes you might get an effect that you wanted, or obviously an effect that you didn't want, but equally worked as well as if you'd planned it. So I was quite, I wanted to be a sort of a photographer type person. It was always as a hobby of mine type of thing. And that's how I did it. So I knew a lot about photography then, which I've now forgotten about, obviously.
Right.
Playing with digital cameras now is like starting all over again.
I want to play another track from the Turn to Red 10-inch EP. And when we come back, we're going to play this and take a little break. And then we come back. I just want to talk to you a little bit more about those days, because it was a very unique and a very different time. This is Life Elsewhere. We're talking to Frank Jenkinson, who took these remarkable pictures of Killing Joke in 1979. And he has a book, and he wants to do an even bigger book. Highly recommend that you check this out, and we'll see if we can help Frank in that direction. Here's another track from the 10-inch EP. This one's called Nervous System. This is Life Elsewhere.
it's a bit of a joke. You're walking down the street to see the faces, see the instinct, they're picking it up. Everybody's looking for a light, beat destroyed, no chance. No more system, I don't like it. No more system, I don't like it. I'm getting out of this system. You better do what they say, better live like a way, like an average man. Things are the country can't do what you want, that's funny. Don't give me all the bullshit you've designed for your perfect man. We know how you do it, mind psychology. No more system, I don't like it. No more system, I don't like it. I'm getting out of the system. Every year I go on holiday. Every day I live routine. 9 till 5, 9 till 5. Live around the clock 'cause they tell me. 9 till 5, 9 till 5. Live around the clock 'cause they tell you. Everybody's looking for a light, looking for a way, no escape. Beat the other man, get your money, get your car. It's a bit of a joke. You're walking down the street to see the faces, see the instinct, they're picking it up. Everybody's looking for a light, beat destroyed, no chance. No more system, I don't like it. 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 I'm getting out of that system.
If you're just joining us, we're talking to Frank Jenkinson. Now, he was a gentleman in 1979 that was hanging out with Killing Joke. He was living in the same house in the Notting Hill Gate area of London, and some of the band was living in the same house, and their manager, Brian Taylor, was living there. That track we just heard was Nervous System from the original 10-inch EP. 1979, when the band was getting together and you were taking these amazing photographs, which we have up, some of them, not all of them, but some of them on our website. These were different times, Frank. What was it like in those days in London with the whole music scene?
Good. I'm just trying to remember. Funny little things happened, really. I remember when the police were kicking off. They kicked off in Shepherd's Bush, which is down the road. And they put out Roxanne, and they got an immediate popularity type of thing.
Yeah.
Everybody was jealous of that. Who else was around? The Teardrop Explodes, the Bauhauses, the Thompson Twins, who became a different set of Thompson Twins later on. God, my memory, I'm getting old now.
I understand, yeah.
Who else was around? There was always people around, and it was quite a creative time. It was just it was obviously post-punk, and a lot of people thought they were still the Sex Pistols, if you like, but we recognized that we're evolving into something else, and I think the music industry had picked something up from the Sex Pistols. Really.
Yes.
But on the Killing Joke side, it was a sort of a self-publishing deal, so the malicious damage people set up and published the first, and got printed the first Turn to Red
Right.
CD. I remember my room was one of the biggest rooms in the house, so I had all the boxes in my room, and we were putting leaflets. You probably did the one you've got in your collection.
Yes.
Putting leaflets and all the stuff that Mike Coles designed into envelopes. And I remember lugging 2 crates of those boxes to Dublin and flogging them to a Dublin record shop at £1 each at the time.
Goodness.
So I got £12 for my trip over there with all that stuff. But nobody had any money, and it was just, who was in government? It was Maggie Thatcher hadn't come in yet. I was just, she had come in. She was there. So Reagan was probably kicking off on your side at the
Right.
time.
Yes.
And then I think going into sort of semi-austerity with the miners' strikes and stuff like that. He's just come out of the 3-day week. It was post-IRA time and stuff like that. So it was pretty grim. All around. So people had to make, I suppose, the best stuff on entertainment they could make. They were tired of the prog rock stuff and were making their own stuff now.
Do you think, Frank, that, clearly it's been written about and talked about many, many times over about the austere times in the UK around that time and the influence that it had on the music. But do you think that there was influences coming in from other directions as well? And what I'm sort of thinking of is that there was sort of a somewhat, and this is a fancy way of saying it, a cross-pollination of different styles of music all sort of merging together. And that was, I think, one of the things that made Killing Joke at the time so incredibly interesting, because there was a sort of a dub reggae thing happening. I mean, the dub reggae, the reggae scene around Notting Hill was very strong, and that was obviously an influence. And it was the music that was played in the house most of the time, other than Miles Davis and people like that. You had that sort of mixture going on. There was also sort of an intellectual element, I think, at the time from America. Music had become kind of a little bit more intelligent, it seemed like. I think Talking Heads, for example, would be one that would pop into mind. And I think Blondie had happened and was on the way. The Dead Kennedys were around. All that type of stuff was going on. So that sort of sense of we can do it ourselves type of excitement was happening then. The book that you have, as I've already said, is self-published. This is only just one very short period, and you have explained that you have a lot more photographs. And I think you would like to get a much bigger book, probably published, capturing the other years. How long did it go on for you taking pictures of the band?
About 2 years, I think. I started in the autumn of '79. The EP had come out, the Turn to Red EP. One of the first things we did was various gigs around London, North London, and colleges, and then we did the BBC. John Peel got a copy.
Yes.
Of the,
Now let me talk to you about the John Peel program. I have mentioned this on the program to my listeners before, but around that period of time, John Peel and I used to communicate with one another. He used to send me he would either give me, jot down recommendations, or every so often I'd get a package in the mail. And likewise, I would send him stuff, which later on, at the latter part of the 80s, I started sending him stuff from Seattle, where I lived, the beginnings of the grunge thing. So there was a sort of a thing where we used to pass things backwards and forwards. Just sort of throw that in as an aside there. But so Killing Joke did one of the John Peel sessions, and you have some of the best photographs of studio recordings. Talk to me about shooting in the studio.
I mean, that John Peel session came off quite early. That was in October '79, right?
Yeah.
And the EP had just come out, and he'd got a copy of the EP, and he didn't believe that an upstart group, if you like, was able to produce that sound. He thought it was some other group pretending, he thought it was the Stranglers, I think, pretending
Ah,
somebody else.
okay.
As far as I remember, it may not be the Stranglers, but some group fairly well established
Yes.
being something else. So they got the gig straight away. So we went in there one night, it was in late, and we were there all night. I remember the engineers getting really pissed off because they were thinking, we want to go home. And of course, Killing Joke were rock stars now, and they wanted to stay there all night. So in the photographs was funny, actually. I've noticed that in some of the clocks, right, there must have been a lapse in the middle. So the clocks start off at 12:30 or something, or 20 to 1, and they go through slowly, and then suddenly it's 6 a.m.
Wow.
So I don't know what happened in the meantime. But
Yeah.
a curious thing that happened as well, there was a track. They did 3 tracks, and they were a track short.
Yes.
So they did the EP tracks, and they wanted another filler, and they composed Militia's Boogie
Okay.
on the spot, and I have a hand clapping part in that. So
Ah, good for you. Good
it's
for
my
you.
claim to fame. I don't think it's ever been recorded. But yes, I mean,
yeah.
memories I say are lost in the space of time.
Yes.
And you can remember bits and pieces when you dig them out. And in those photographs, which are not in the book, obviously, are sort of the people behind the scenes getting stuff ready,
Yes.
catering for the needs of the artists, I suppose, of the talent,
Yes.
and so on and so forth. Yeah.
I want to talk to you about the talents, and I want to talk to you about the mystery and some of the myths around Killing Joke then and even now. We're talking to Frank Jenkinson. He has an incredible book that documents Killing Joke in a very short period of time from 1979. Some of the images are up on the Life Elsewhere site. Going to play another cut from the first 10-inch EP. This one's called Are You Receiving? We're going to hear that right after this.
You are listening to Life Elsewhere with Norman B. You can learn more about this program at lifeelsewhere.co. That's C-O.
but not yet. They say it's getting settled. This is an order from the United Police Force of Great Britain. The minds of the young people today are being infiltrated by the so-called Beat Generation. These people's identification are on file. We have orders from the new government to detain these people immediately. These people must be detained immediately. These people must be detained immediately. Are you receiving? 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 Are you receiving?
My guest is Frank Jenkinson. He has an incredible book with photographs that he took in a very short period of time in 1979 of Killing Joke. That was Killing Joke with Are You Receiving from the original 10-inch EP, the very first thing that they put out. We're talking to Frank Jenkinson, who was right there at the time taking photographs. Frank, let's just talk about some of the myths and mysteries surrounding the band at that time. There was a lot of speculation. There was stuff that was written in the NME and the Melody Maker, and the band themselves sort of perpetuated this sort of mystery and myth about themselves. Can you just talk a little bit about that?
God, if I can remember. I mean, I think that whole mystique thing kind of originated from Jazz Coleman. And a friend of mine who was in the house with me at the time, Philip, who was also quite into things spiritual. The Bhagwan Sri Wanise was a big presence in the house, and another friend of mine had just come back from eating oranges for 4 months in Spain. He came back with yellow hair, and he was a devotee of, God, who was it? One of these guru people at the time. But the jazz side was all about Aleister Crowley and sort of the black magic side of things.
Yeah. Was that, Frank, was that for real, or was that just a little bit of theatre on Jazz's part?
I don't know. I mean, some people have taken them seriously. My attitude would be that I think this is provocative, really.
Yes.
And it's kind of like there for show, and it's a good way to annoy people. So if you want to get publicity, you'd probably shoot me for saying this. Not that I met him recently at a gig, really. I don't know much about it in no way, really, other than it was a presence in the house. People took it seriously or not. It was Jazz's thing. This is my memory of it. It might be wrong. The other members of the band, I mean, Paul apparently has an interest, but I didn't notice that so much. But it was certainly, I worked with the press.
Yes.
Got them a reputation in that area.
Yeah. It is a fascinating document. I can't wait to see. You have 2 years worth of photographs that you documented. I would love to see 1980 and 1981.
The 1980 section is mainly when they started going to bigger venues.
Yes.
And when they started going to the studios. There's a lot of, I was just looking at it the other day, there's a lot of the, I just put some Townhouse stuff up on sorry, I have this website called Killing Joke Picture Book on Facebook, so your listeners might want to look at that.
Okay.
And I'm up there, I'm posting pictures that didn't make the grade for the book, really. They may be a bit blurry here and there, or the emulsion has gone on them.
Yes.
That sort of stuff. The 1980 photographs are kind of big gigs. They're not as intimate, frankly, as the 1979 gigs, where you're standing, your punter's standing next to youth, and everybody's on the same level.
Yes.
So they move away in that respect. So it's just a different perspective, I suppose.
They're fabulous photographs. I think you've documented a period of time which is just wonderful, and it's great to look back. It evokes all kinds of memories for me, and I know for people that weren't there at the time, it's going to be wonderful for people that weren't there to see what it was like. Terrific stuff, Frank.
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of audience shots that I deliberately took.
Yeah.
And I don't know if we're ever going to see those. I'll put them up on the Facebook site so people can spot themselves if they were ever at a gig.
Right.
There was one shot in the book, actually. If you look over Youth's shoulder, there's Shane McGowan in the audience. I just noticed that the other day.
That's incredible. I love it.
That's quite good, yes.
I love it. Frank, it has been an absolute delight talking to you. You've been a fabulous guest. You took great photographs. I really appreciate it, you sharing it with us. We'll have all the link information up on the Life Elsewhere site. We've been talking to Frank Jenkinson. The book is called Killing Joke. It's documenting the band in a very short period of time in 1979. Frank Jenkinson, thank you so very much for joining us at Life Elsewhere.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
For details about Frank Jenkinson's extraordinary book of photographs from 1979 of Killing Joke, go to lifeelsewhere.co. That's C-O. Next, from 2013, highlights from my exclusive interview with Killing Joke's bass player, Martin Glover, a.k.a. Youth. Turn to Red from Killing Joke right here at Life Elsewhere. This amazing piece of music certainly stands up to the test of time. It was the melding of a dub sensibility with a post-punk urgency that attracted me to Killing Joke's sound, with Martin Glover's bass pulsating in the foreground. Since the early days of Killing Joke, Martin Glover has gone on to become one of the music world's most prolific and in-demand producers. He still performs with Killing Joke, he DJs at events, and occasionally he has time to stop and chat. I caught up with Martin Glover via Skype at his home and studio in Spain. Martin Glover, welcome to Life Elsewhere.
Thank you for having me.
Nice to talk with you. It's been a long time. I want to talk to you about what's happening musically. Now, you've been around the music business for an awful long time. You've been involved. The list, before I was getting you on Skype here, I was looking through the list of things you've been involved in. It ranges so far and wide, from Killing Joke to Paul McCartney to Primal Scream to all kinds of things. So you've had your hands, so to speak, in all kinds of music. What I'm interested in finding out from Martin Glover, from Youth, where's music going? Are you encouraged about it? Let's start with that.
Well, I'm always encouraged by music because I'm always inspired by music. So yeah, I mean that's a first. That's something sometimes I've had to work at. You know, sometimes you have doubts and disillusionments, and you go off the path a bit. But I've learned that, really, if you give music what she requires, which is a lot of devotion, she kind of rewards you in lots of different ways. So I have kind of devoted the last 35 years to making music and being creative and being inspired and working with artists and helping them realize and manifest their visionary ideas with music as well. But to answer the question, yeah, it's cyclical, and it's kind of music is you're touching eternity when you're getting into music. The form, the vibration, the frequency. It's so the way the music scene kind of works, the music biz. I don't know. I've always been a bit of an outsider, despite having penetrated mass consciousness a few times. And yeah, there's a lot of mystery to that as well, but. Essentially, it moves in cycles. I kind of feel the way things are at the moment is very similar to what they may have been in the early 60s, even though I was a wee baby then. But, it's change. People in the music business, they've seen this change. People go on about the recession for the last 4 years. Music business has been in deep recession for over 10 years.
Yes.
Maybe 14, 15 years. And I saw it coming, 14, 15 years ago, and I thought, we've got to change the way we work. This isn't sustainable, and this isn't going to continue. And with the advent of the internet and accessibility, people just cannot afford to spend the money that they spent in the 80s, 90s making records all the time. And so I kind of changed the way I worked. And luckily, I really embraced the technology that was emerging at the time, which, of course, does make things a lot faster and a lot quicker and a lot more accessible. And that's enabled me to, kind of get up to steam and pick up the slack, so to speak, because now we don't have to rent big, expensive studios to make records. We can do them. I can do most of the records I do at home. Although, having said that, I'm sitting in my studio in Spain, where I have built a state-of-the-art studio.
Yeah, right. You just touched on something, Martin. We're talking to Martin Glover, aka Youth. We're talking to him at his home and studio in Spain on Skype. You just touched on something which I want to focus in on, and that's technology. Technology changed, and it must have changed how musicians approached what music making. I can remember at a time, you'll be familiar with this name. I remember interviewing Sly Dunbar, the great reggae drummer Sly Dunbar, at one time, asking him whether electronic drums were going to be, whether it was going to change how he played. He said, "No, man, I love it. This is incredible. Think of all the things I can do now." So has technology, from Martin Glover's point of view, has it been a boon to what you're doing?
It's been a real bonus, and always has. I find technology very creative. As long as you harness it and you make it work for you, you don't get lost into working for it, which is easy to do. It's very liberating. And I think Sly Dunbar and a lot of the Jamaican scene over the last 10 years really embraced that technology for a lot of other genres. And they were on it straight away. I mean, it's still a very powerful thing. Having said that, it's very hip for young musicians today to go back to analog recording or using analog compressors and things like that. And so it's a cyclical thing. The technology is there to serve your muse and your inspiration. So if your muse is to record analog with tape with then do that. And technology allows us to do that today, if we want to, or if not.
We are talking about the future of music and where it's going. And I would like to know, Martin, thought I heard you say that music has been in a slump and it's coming out of a slump. It's been in a recession.
Well, I'd say it's still in a recession. I think it's going to get worse, especially for the majors, over the next few years. Not only that, the whole tradition of training up engineers, British engineers have ruled the world in the last 25, 30, 40 years, and that whole tradition now has gone with the demise of the big studio. We'll start feeling those repercussions, in the next 4 or 5 years, I think. However, music will never die. There'll always be music. There'll always be people finding a way to make money out of it and selling it, managing it, being agents for it. And that's continuing today, and people are resourceful and they find new ways of making a living out of it. And it certainly is a lot easier to get your music up online and being heard now. Doesn't necessarily mean that all the music that you're going to hear online is any good, but it's up there, and people do break through. And it sort of reminds me of when I was in Gala and you used to look at these dusty dance floors.
Yeah.
Throughout the night, there'd always be 1 or 2 people who would emerge that would lead the dance. It'd usually be a girl and a guy, not necessarily together but connected, but they will emerge out of the mass and create the focus and drive the party forward. And it's the same with bands. You have these saturated, massive bands. One or two emerge, pop up, and they kind of define what we're all feeling at the time. Always happens, always will. And, as far as the future goes, that's not going to change, I don't think. The way we interact with that, the way we absorb it, and the way we, consume it, that will change and is changing.
Martin, over the years, particularly over maybe, let's say, the last 20 years, it would seem that dance music really came to the fore, specifically in the UK and Europe, and then it translated over to America. But dance music really seemed to pave the way for popular music, and it seems like rock and roll as we knew it seemed to take almost a back seat. Am I right in that observation?
Well, yeah, I think coming out of punk, which was a big sort of Pol Pot leveler, year zero, and that was all about people using really simple chords and making them sound great, and anyone getting up there, but with the energy and intensity being great. And that was very liberating coming out of prog rock. I mean, I didn't consider being a musician until punk happened because I thought there was no point. Punk came and went very quickly. Couple of years, boom. Suddenly it was all very karaoke and, very pub bandy. And so the next thing that quickly followed on its heels was post-punk. And that, I think, for young people, it was young people embracing the spirit of punk, but with their own vocabulary. So for me and other kids my age in their late teens, that meant disco because we'd grown up with, and dub. We'd grown up with dub.
Yeah.
So those elements started being appropriated into the sort of post-punk aesthetic, and people getting away from the American blues influence that punk previously had, a la the Ramones or the Sex Pistols. It was all very blues-orientated, and being more influenced by European electronic music from the 70s of Can, Kraftwerk, Neu, things like that.
Yeah. An example of post-punk music there from Martin Glover. That was from an album called The Empty Quarter that Martin made in, the early 80s after he left Killing Joke for the first time. Along with Ben Watkins there, The Empty Quarter. Interesting music, that. Hard one to find. Do recommend that you check it out if you can. This is Life Elsewhere. I'm Norman B., and my exclusive Life Elsewhere interview with Martin Glover continues. Martin, you've been involved with so many different genres of music over the years. Has there been anything that's come along that surprised you?
Well, you seem to have less and less of those sort of cultural phenomena like acid house or punk rock. I mean, the latest one, I suppose, is EDM in America.
Yeah.
And now America, again, like with punk, it took America 10 years to digest punk and then, reinvigorate it in its own way, a la Sonic Youth and stuff. So
let me stop you there just for a minute, because this is something which I think is really, really fascinating, and that is how long it takes, because the way music and way styles are digested in Europe, particularly in the UK, it happens very fast, and things come and go, fashion comes and goes. But in America, it does take an awful long time. Have you got any thoughts about that, why that should be?
Well, my theory is just geography, really. It's so vast, America.
Yes.
You can't have a national phenomena in the same way you can in the UK. It takes much longer for it to build up. Bands have to tour it for a few years before they penetrate that.
Right.
It does happen occasionally. And ironically, a lot of the bigger American bands today, they have to break it in the UK first to get their kind of hip credibility to be able to go back and penetrate their own home turf. Well, obviously, culturally, things have changed a lot with the internet and what that's brought everybody, and good and bad, it's brought a very short attention span, but it has brought amazing amounts of information to everybody's fingertips, which has made the public, I think, quite aware, more aware than they ever been, of things that were considered underground and avant-garde. And those things can slip into the public consciousness via young ears today. I work with a lot of young artists, and things they're picking up on, it may be Nick Drake, it may be, I don't know, Black Sabbath, but they're little weird things that they reinvent in their own way, and they do it their own way. It's often like wrong the way people would have done it when they first did it, but it's like the XX or something, they
Yes.
kind of, they play the drum machines by hand, and they don't care whether they're in time or not. And they break the rules, and that's really encouraging, I think. And I'm sure they'll continue to do so. I think it'd be great fun being a kid today. You've got so much territory and geography you can roam around in and take and make into your form of expression.
Martin, I want to find out more about influences. Just recently, Lou Reed died, and since then, the obituaries have been pouring out of the woodwork, it seems to me, and people talking about how influential the Velvet Underground were. Do you have any thoughts about influences like that and how significant they are?
Well, yeah, I think it's really important. Artists are influenced by other artists. Their influences are what are going to define them and make them unique, paradoxically. Often you'll meet artists who say, I don't listen to anybody but myself, and they're not going to go anywhere because without those influences, you really are a rudderless ship. Of course, everybody does have them, whether they own up to it or not. Things like Velvet Underground, who for years have been voted the most influential band in history, I think superseded in the NME recently by Noi for the last 2 years.
Yes.
Still a huge influence. A good example, today I was listening to Brian Eno, Taking Tiger Mountain. Brian Eno, another massively influential artist, one of the biggest, like Velvet Underground. There's few tracks on that album which really sound exactly like the Velvet Underground. And you can tell he's using those influences of the Velvet Underground very clearly and on his sleeve with his own album. And there's even one track, actually, that I had to stop and think, this is a Joy Division track. And I went back and put it back on. It's Eno. It's like Joy Division absolutely just took that template of that track and made it. It's a very exciting thing when you see that in effect. That's a Renaissance tradition, and it's a timeless tradition. It's a tradition you find in Ireland with traditional music. It's an oral tradition of passing on.
Yes.
You'll see it from Johnny Cash passing his guitar to Bob Dylan. You see it in all kinds of music, but especially today, because that information is so widely available, kids are savvy with it, and so they know what the cool influence is, they know where to go, they know what to take, and they go even further, and they take things. Inherently, what great DJs, what great artists do is take things that are totally uncool and make them cool.
I want to talk about the reggae influence right after this.
This is Life Elsewhere with Norman B.
My guest on Skype is Martin Glover, aka Youth, and we're talking about the future of music. And I want to talk about the influence of reggae and where reggae stands today in music, Martin. It's been a huge, big influence on you. In fact, let's talk about the name that people know you by as Youth. Can you explain to people how that came about?
Yeah, Youth. I was living in a squat in London in the late 70s, and there were a few Jamaicans, and they couldn't really remember my name. They just referred to me as the youth.
Yes.
The youth. But because I was so messy, my flatmates, because I listened to Big Youth a lot, rechristened me Pig Youth in homage of Big Youth and my messy persona. And it's kind of stuck. So for a long time I was called Pig. And then that kind of dropped off in my 20s, and it just became Youth, and it's still Youth. Now I'm in my 50s, it should be probably Elder Youth. But,
Older Youth, right. I like that, yeah.
Has stuck with me. I don't know why. It was this Australian who really got it to stick. But I quite like it. Reggae, yeah, massive influence on my life. Going to sound systems in the late 70s, almost indescribable experience in a tiny room, wall to ceiling, big speakers, crammed so tight, you're pushing up against everybody, you can't see anything, it's so dark, full of ganja smoke, and 20k rig pumping this bass that just shook you from head to toe. At 4 o'clock in the morning, blueses or shebeens, as they were known, were like illegal raves that just played dub all night long. You could get a beer and a draw and have a good night. And I used to go down them, and that experience really informed what I wanted to experience. Being at a rock gig, I wanted to be in a band that could create something like that. So we also shared a rehearsal room with Motorhead at the time. So volume and bass were really important.
Martin, it has been an absolute pleasure talking to you. I want to have you back on. I want to talk to you about the past, and I want you to recount, if you're up for this, just some stories, just being in the studio next door to Motorhead, being on the road. Would you be up for that? Would you do that?
Yeah, it'd be my pleasure, Mr. B. And thank you very much for being a very genial host. And I wish you and your show much success in the future.
You have been listening to Life Elsewhere, created and hosted by Norman B. Life Elsewhere is written and produced by Norman B. Associate producer is Camille Warden. Guest booking and additional research by Stephanie Lane. Behind-the-scenes assistance by George Fuller, James Vann, Bruce Goodman, and Allison Klein. Send your request for The Hit That Never Was to hitthatneverwas at lifeelsewhere.co. That's C-O. We love to hear what you think about Life Elsewhere. Send your questions, queries, and comments to info@lifeelsewhere.co. That's C-O. Life Elsewhere is produced at the studios of WMNF Tampa.